მწუხარო მოვლენების შემდეგ ამან ხაზი გაუსვა იმის აუცილებლობას შემლობა ეუთოსიებით ასევე ეკონომიკის ვისაუბროთ რომლებიც დგას დღის ორგანიზაციის ხარდაჭერით ეს არის საქართველოს არის საქართველოსა და რუსეთის ეკონომიკურ ასპექტში სადაც იმაკებები ტრანსნესტრიასა და მოლდოვას შორის რომ განვიხილოთ ეკონომიკური თანამშრომლობის შორის და იმიტომ რომ ეკონომიკური ურთიერთობა უნდა იყოს ხიდი ლიტერატურულად და ასევე პირდაპირ მნიშვნელობით ამან უნდა დააკავშიროს ქვეყნები პოლიტიკურადაც რეგიონული თანამშრომლობა ეფექტური მმართველობა და ეკონომიკური სტაბილურობა ყველაფერი არის ძალიან ნეიტრალური საშუალება რომ გაძლიერდეს თანამშრომლობა და სტრატეგია ჩვენ შევიმუშაოთ სამოქმედო გეგმა ჩვენ გვყავს საბჭო აგრეთვე ჩვენ და შევიმუშავეთ ბიზნეს რეგულაციები და საქართველოს აქვს რეგულაციები რომლებიც გვაჩვენებენ ეფექტური მმართველობის წარმატებულ შედეგებს ასეთი თანამშრომლობის ზომების განხორციელება ხელი შეუწყოს საქართველოს წინსვლას მსოფლიოს თვალში ბოლო დროს საქართველოს აჩვენა რომ ნამდვილად შეიძლება კორუფციის დამარცხება და ამან ძალიან დიდი როლში იყო ანგარიში, სადაც აღწერილი იყო საქართველოს მიღწევები ამ კუთხით და რა თქმა უნდა ეს არის უნიკალური მიღწევები.
Success story as a member of the Eastern Partnership Cooperation. The Eastern Partnership Cooperation is a regional group of 6 countries who have a special relation with the European Union in order to make it easier for these 6 countries to access the European Union. And Georgia is the best example of how such a regional cooperation can be organized. But let's not let complacency stand in the way of progress. Let today's discussions foster innovation and political dialogue and continue the efforts of advancing and strengthening sustainable economic developments within Georgia, as well as in the greater OSCE area. To further explore these topics and share their expertise, I am joined today by my colleagues, Ambassador Eustathios Lotsos, Chairman of the OSCE Economic and Environmental Committee, Permanent Representative of Greece to the OSCE, Ambassador Philip Dimitrov, Head of the EU Delegation in Georgia, Mr. Georgi Kadagidze, the Governor of the National Bank of Georgia, and Mr. Andrei Ilarionov, a Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute. I am giving each of the gentlemen a time lapse of about 8 to 10 minutes, and I ask them to give their introductory remarks after one another, after which you can ask your questions and give your comments. And I would ask you to be so kind and announce already now through your secretariat who wants to take the floor so that we can have a quick and good discussion. Dear Ambassador, I will give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is an honor to have been invited to address this outstanding audience, and at the outset, please allow me to express my appreciation to the organizers of this event, the Parliament of Georgia, and particularly the Vice Speaker, Mr. Tsantreli, who was the inspiring force behind it, as well as the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly for their warm hospitality. I would like to use this opportunity to express my personal appreciation for the initiative and efforts of President Efthymiou to strengthen the interaction between the Parliamentary Assembly and the OSCE executive structures. The OSCE community can only benefit from such a dialogue and cooperation that hopefully will materialize also in common initiative and actions in addressing security challenges throughout all the 3 OSCE dimensions. I had the privilege to address the Parliamentary Assembly's General Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and the Environment last February in Vienna, where outlined the priorities of the OSCE Economic and Environmental Committee for this year. I was encouraged by the support and comments I received, and I'm looking forward to continuing this interaction in the months to come as we all move forward towards the OSCE Ministerial Council in Dublin. Ladies and gentlemen, when the Irish OSCE chairmanship asked me to chair the Economic and Environmental Committee, I felt compelled by the enormous challenges laying ahead. The financial turbulences and fiscal pressure that we are all witnessing throughout the European continent and far beyond are becoming a factor that contributes to regional instability and proliferation of transnational threats. Moreover, the debt burden weighing down upon European members of the OSCE is of a magnitude which shall inevitably dictate the emergence of concomitant diminution of concern for collective problems and challenges. Under these circumstances, solidarity and cooperation might be put to a test. In the meantime, and as austerity measures risk to be considered as the only cure for all evil, we are witnessing rising unemployment and expanding social deprivation and poverty. Insufficient political will to tackle corruption, organized crime and illegal immigration is contributing extensively to radicalization of societies and the rise of extremism. Under such a projected course of events, international organizations such as the OSCE risk not only to have their budgets slashed, but also their relevance lost in channels of political obscurity. Almost 40 years after Helsinki, the OSCE does not deserve this fate. The initiative of the Irish chairmanship to develop a concept for the 40th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act in 2015, at which OSCE participating states will measure progress towards a security community, is worthwhile supporting. To remain vigorous in times of stringency, the OSCE must reform itself. Changed realities dictate reconsideration of OSCE's overall posture regarding its mechanisms and approaches. Global political and social developments must receive whatever attention and resources the organization can spare. In this context, and since 2009, the OSCE's second dimension for
I have. I think it's only the head table.
Yes.
Why don't you just come down here? Seriously.
All right. Okay. So I'll continue from where I just began to say that in this context and since 2009, the OSCE's second dimension, for a long time undervalued, is gaining steadily prominence in its place within the organization's comprehensive concept of security. Nevertheless, misperceptions still consist and persist, preventing participating states from realizing the goal and objectives set by the 2003 Maastricht Strategy on the economic and environmental dimension. Some participating states continue to consider the economic and environmental dimension as having a simple complementary role to play despite the significance and the proliferation of economic and environmental challenges to security and their repercussions to societies. The Corfu process that was launched in 2009 testified to the incorrectness of this approach that risks undermining the whole concept of security and create gaps and imbalances. I am convinced that if participating states wish to strengthen the global relevance and regional contribution of the OSCE, governments, parliamentarians, and the civil society must spare this organization from unconstructive generalization and from singling out dimensions and commitments. If political will permits and joint efforts apply, the OSCE has the potential to regain the confidence of the public and to reconnect with the needs of the average citizen. Because let's face it, there is a gap. The engagement of the OSCE in addressing economic and environmental security requirements is bound to play a central role in this respect. For this reason, the main focus of the Economic and Environmental Committee in 2012 has been placed not accidentally on good governance. The issue touches upon fundamental principles of economic as well as democratic development and targets right into the heart of many causes of the global financial crisis. Good governance is the main theme for this year's Economic and Environmental Forum that will take place in Prague in autumn. Jointly and in close cooperation with the chairmanship, the OSCE Secretary General and the Coordinator for Economic and Environmental Activities, the Economic and Environmental Committee of the Permanent Council pursues the objective of defining the prerequisite for a stronger OSCE engagement in the field of good governance. As we move towards the Dublin OSCE Ministerial Council, OSCE participating states should consider recommitting themselves to the principle of good governance. It is a long-term project, not a one-off decision just to mark the end of the Irish chair in this field. Promoting good governance is the only way to remove impediments to economic development, as good and transparent governance provides a trustworthy foundation for achievable as well as acceptable reforms. I am convinced that it is essential to agree again and recommit to good governance and its fundamental goals in fighting corruption, poverty, unemployment, organized crime, money laundering, the financing of terrorism, as well as the causes of social depression, in order to achieve financial stability and social empowerment throughout the OSCE area. Good governance is a must for sustainable development. This shall also be facilitated by creating a transparent and favorable investment climate that adds value to regional cooperation and security. In addition, good governance makes governments more responsible, more accountable. And I know, and as you said, Madam Vice Chairman, the Georgian government is really keen on promoting good governance and has a strong interest also in making this issue as a priority in its foreign policy. Yesterday, as I was wandering around the city of Batumi, I was pleasantly surprised to have passed outside the office of the USAID, where the title outside was Good Governance in Georgia Program. And I would like to urge everybody to contribute through the parliamentarian mechanism and bilaterally also to contribute to this important project. And as you said, Madam Moderator, none of this is possible without good governance. On the grounds that it is preferable to talk rather than engage in conflict, verbal exorcism continue to be the instrument of choice for the resolution of clashing interests. This is acceptable when socio-political conditions are more or less tolerable. It is not when matters reach the critical stage. In 2012, the worldwide complex of political, economic, demographic, and financial parameters is unraveling. Under these circumstances, vague, well-meaning, and soothing exhortations for better, honest, civilized, and reasonable behavior do not contribute much to the sustenance of the tolerance required for the preservation of OSCE security model. What is needed is modesty of objectives on the one hand and simplicity in their pursuit on the other. Under the political mandate and guidance that the Second Committee received last year from the Permanent Council in Vilnius, I have initiated the reviewing of the implementation of the OSCE's 2003 Maastricht Strategy on Economic and Environmental Dimension. This intends to be a process of assessing the past and revalue the present with the sole hope to address, among others, the erosion of confidence to the OSCE's ability in addressing security challenges on economic and environmental character. However, this shall not be perceived as another attempt to reassess a strategy in order to come up with another strategy of medium and long-term objectives that usually at the end are cut off from the reality and do not correspond to the needs of the citizens. In concluding, reconnecting the OSCE with real security in the field of economic and environmental activities, it is urgent. In this process, we have to join forces, and I believe that the Vienna establishment could benefit by engaging the parliamentarians and the civil society in a broader dialogue on the consequences of evolving economic and environmental developments on security, regional stability, and social prosperity. I think my final remark, and it is fair for me to say, I would like to extend my many thanks to my colleague ambassadors in the OSCE in Vienna for their assistance that I received, and I see a few of them in this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lotsos, for giving us your view as being the one in charge of the third committee. And it was really very interesting to get your points on good governance. But not to lose time, I'm going to hand the floor instantly over to Ambassador Dimitrov, who is the head of the EU mission in Georgia. You have the floor.
Very much, Madam Vice President. Ladies and gentlemen, I probably have to start with the EU being the ambassador of it. You know, it is very legitimate to talk about economic crisis, about the difficulties of Europe, about the problems of the euro, and it is good that we're mentioning this often and discussing it. On the other hand, to claim that Europe is not one of the most prosperous, economically developed and sustainable from that point of view place is ridiculous. It is desirable to discuss the faults of one or another European government. Why not the Brussels bureaucracy of the European Union? And this is something that can hopefully bring us to better results. To claim that Europe does not give some of the best examples of good governance is simply not true. So, putting things into this framework, we can go further, and this gives the legitimate right of the European Union to be trying to help the development of economy and good governance, and it does it through its policy vis-à-vis its members, of course, but also its neighbors. And the instruments we are using are mainly two. The one of them is the direct support, which you can find in such instruments like the European Neighbourhood Instrument, which concerns especially the countries of the neighbourhood, with different programs which support one thing or another. as well as with the support to the infrastructure. And I can tell you that yesterday I had the privilege of signing, together with the European Investment Bank, a particular agreement with Georgia, which will help the development of its road infrastructure. I can assure you that in the coming years, according to the
Check. Oui.
Is it okay now? Yes. Well, the other aspect is what we can do for the opening of the European market to countries like Georgia. And this is the new generation of free trade agreements, the deep and comprehensive ones, which are proposed to all desiring members of our neighborhood. And I have to admit that in this field, the experience with Georgia was extremely interesting. Georgia has had a long and, I would say, rather difficult period of discussing the starting of the DCFTA negotiations, and in it, it's shown something very characteristic for Georgia, a particular stubbornness and the desire on the part of the Georgian side to do everything their own way, something which can drive a bureaucrat or a diplomat like me completely to the verge of tears. However, this stubbornness and this effort to find really the most suitable way was, in my view, the guarantee for the sustainability of this endeavor, and as a result, I very much believe that the further development of the negotiations on the DCFTA will be both easy and fruitful. And here we actually come to the point of good governance, and I would say that this kind of desire to indeed have the ownership of whatever is undertaken is one of the characteristics of a successful and sustainable achievement. In the same time, of course, we have been witnessing a lot of examples in which the combination of vision and realism proves to be the best way to operate. I, of course, would not claim a great or decisive contribution into the Georgian efforts by the support of the European Union, but this support, in fact, was there. And having been there, we worked as much as we could in the field of supporting the development of democratic institutions, something which will go on in future too. And just to make a mentioning about the issue of corruption, which was mentioned quite so many times here. Indeed, Georgia, and the World Bank has been very eloquent in its presentation about this issue, has made tremendous achievements in corruption on every level. There is no such thing like a corrupt boss of an agency which is completely uncorrupt. Well, we may accuse probably the Georgian government of still desiring to impose its ideas everywhere or in many places, and this is faced by a vibrant civil society which challenges these efforts. In other words, we see a typical picture of a democratic development. However, in order to have this maintained, in order to prove the sustainability not only of the achievements and the efforts that has been made by the Georgian side, but also the capacity of the Georgian society and government to maintain these results on institutional and political grounds. Indeed, as it was mentioned before, the challenge of the coming elections is of particular importance. And I'm sure that it is exactly the OSCE which will be able to provide support in this direction, because it is the institutions of OSCE and ODIHR in particular, but it doesn't mean that the parliamentarians of the OSCE do not have the say in this, that can really provide monitoring on a large scale and for a long period of time of these crucial elections that are going to take place in Georgia. This will be the contribution of the OSCE to the good governance of Georgia and to the sustainability of its political and economic reforms. Thank you.
Ambassador, let me thank you most warmly for your words, and I would like to say that I especially appreciate that you spoke about election observation, which, as you said, is one of the core important businesses that we, the OSCE, but especially also the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, have on our agenda. But I would now like to give the floor to the Governor of the National Bank of Georgia.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to address you today. I understand the timing constraints that we have, so I will try to make my presentation as short as possible. My presentation basically has three parts: what kind of country we have inherited, what have been done for the last 8 years, and what kind of economy are we building. We should say that Georgia still ranks among the lowest in the Europe if we take the GDP per capita. But the major question is how it happened. How it happened that at the end of the 80s, countries like Poland, Turkey, and other East European countries had approximately the same level of development as Georgia had. And 25 years later, we ended up with a situation where these countries are 3 times, 2 times, in some cases 4 times richer than Georgia is. And the question, so what happened that in 25 years these countries have succeeded Georgia economically so much? And the question, and the answer to this question is relatively simple. It's all about the start of the 90s, and there's a lack of analysis of that period, but I want to tell you the figures. From the year 1989 to the year 1994, Georgia lost 70% of its economy. Not 17, 70. According to different sources, Germany lost 55 to 60% of its economy after the World War II. Most of the economy was ruined. Majority of families were left without source of income. And what's more important and more tragic, hundreds of thousands economically active population left the country. So basically, there were some signs of stabilization afterwards, but Georgia entered the 21st century on the edge of question to be a failed state or not to be. And from after those revolutions, the important reforms started. I won't stay on these reforms a lot because a lot was said, a lot will be said during this conference. Just several figures. In terms of ease of doing business, Georgia was ranking 112th in 2005, today 12th. Economic Freedom Index, Georgia ranks 26. In terms of the global corruption parameter, Georgia ranks amongst is between actually United Kingdom, Canada. And what's very important, Georgia ranks first in the world in terms of the public perception of decrease of level of corruption. And this was the reforms that brought us the following figures. For the last 8 years, average annual growth of Georgian economy was 6%. One may say that, okay, Georgia was a small economy and it's an emerging economy, therefore it's a good figure, but what you may find other countries with the same figure. So I want to pay your attention on the following issue. Georgia scored average 6% growth for the last 8 years on the background of the following events. In 2006, Georgia lost its major trade partner in one day. I mean the Russian embargo. At that time, Russia constituted more than up to 50% of Russian trade, of Georgian trade. In one day, it disappeared. In this period, Georgia had undergone severe internal political tensions. We had early parliamentary and early presidential elections, as you may remember. In 2008, it was followed by war with Russia and world financial crisis. All this happened during this last 8 years. So everything that could hurt the business development, everything that hurts economic development have happened. And this is a background against which we have reached the figures that I'm discussing. What makes Georgia, and I'll be just keeping some slides of growth like this one about the international reserves. In 2003, for instance, the total foreign exchange reserves of the country was up to 200 million. Now it's of course 15 times more. What makes Georgia different from other Eastern European countries and other countries who have now the debt crisis is that Georgia is not indebted country. Total public debt to GDP of this country is somewhere at 35%, well below the 60% threshold, which is considered to be sound. The same can be observed in terms of the deficit to GDP. Basically, Georgia is committed to have small government. Georgia is committed to have very prudent monetary and fiscal policy. Of course, one of our major challenges was inflation in terms, and as other emerging countries, Georgia is also very exposed to and being the very open economy is exposed to the shocks on the world markets, and therefore it was our challenge, especially last year during the spike in the food prices and energy prices. However, the core inflation was and will be stable because this is a basically reaction to the prudent and sound monetary and fiscal policy. In terms of the growth, additional figure, very simple figures that shows the growth in numbers is in 2003, total banking sector was 1 billion. Today is 13 times more. In terms of the another thing that makes Georgia really different is its sound banking system. Georgia is very well capitalized. It has one of the most conservative capital adequacy ratio as well as liquidity ratios. At the end of the day, the fact is that we didn't have to bail out any single financial institution during the crisis period. No single financial institution have been provided with any kind of government support, which shows the resilience of our financial sector. But at the end of the day, what kind of economy are we building? What is, because Georgia is not rich with resources, what we have and what we are proud of, to have the ambition of being one of the most liberal countries in this region, with the lowest taxes, most secure, least corrupt, business-friendly, guest-friendly, and of course, we are also very proud of our wine, as it was told before by other speakers. So basically, the major idea of our economy is how we see it and how we say it is that we want Georgia to become the regional hub of the region. We are building Georgia as a center of this region. What is even more important is that, as you know, up to 48 countries in the world are landlocked. Most of them are in Africa, but our region is also very important in this term because two of our neighbors, Armenia and Azerbaijan, are landlocked, as well as 4 states in Central Asia. So this geographic position is also key, turning Georgia to the what we call hub economy. When we talk about the hub economy, we are talking about being the logistical center, being the trade center, entertainment center, financial center, and so on. There are cases of success already that, again, because of the timing constraints, I cannot, I'll be skipping. On the electricity part, here again, another major sector of economies that will be driving Georgia. Georgia is becoming the country who will be exporting electricity and will be providing electricity to this very important region. What we do have, I mentioned that we don't have the rich resources, but what we do have is our hydro potential. And in terms of the hydro potential, only 18% is being utilized. So basically, this is something which is very important, and there's a number of investments going on in this field of economy, which will make Georgia not only electricity export country, but at the same time, it will make Georgia very, very interesting for the energy for those sectors of economy who consume a lot of energy. And continuation to the hub idea is that, as you all know, Georgia is the only alternative of providing Caspian oil to Europe, bypassing Russia. Basically, one of the geopolitical stances of our country is provide alternative sources of for different types of goods and services to Europe, alternative to Russia. For instance, many of you may not know about, and it's not only energy is a very important part, but I want also to bring you the case, for instance, that in the Black Sea, all the way from Romania to Poti, there was a already finished and implemented project putting the fiber optic on in the Black Sea. So basically, now we have another route combining Europe to Georgia and then going to, in this case, Azerbaijan and Asian countries. So we received the alternative of transmission of data from Europe to China, alternative to Russian monopoly of Rostelecom, which was existing before. Again, this is the idea of hub economy that we are developing. This is the most important part, and this is all may only happen if the investors, if the different businesses feel secure, feel free, and what is very important, want to be the part of corrupt-free environment. And the last but not least, and I would say most important part, is tourism, which is becoming the leading sector of Georgian economy, and this city is the best proof to that. In terms, this city is symbolic to the successes of this country in the economic terms. And basically here you see the figures. In 2006, Georgia enjoyed close to 600,000 visitors. In 2011, this figure was close to 3 million. And this is the figures we are all committed. These are the figures that we have ambition to succeed. Basically, this was very short at glance the Georgian economy. So again, I can talk about this hours and hours, but I will let other speakers to go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Katagidze. It's very interesting to see the light shed from one country onto the situation in the region. And I must say I'm very glad that you ended by talking about tourism. And I think it's very, for us, it's very well understandable sitting here in Batumi and really enjoying the hospitality and the fantastic possibilities that tourism is offering to your country. But I'm now going to give the floor to Mr. Ilarionov, a fellow from the Cato Institute and former economic advisor to Prime Minister Putin.
Thank you. Chairperson. Honorable members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me use this opportunity for this session in wonderful city Batumi, in Republic of Georgia, to discuss one of the most important challenges to sustainable economic growth in Europe, and maybe the challenge. And I'll try to explain what I mean in this case. Let's start with the most urgent crisis that we are discussing over the last several years. One of them is the Greece economic crisis that attracted attention, first of all in Greece, in Europe, and around the world. Over the last several years, there are many dimensions of this crisis, but just let's look into some kind of the essence. GDP per capita in Greece over the last several years fell by almost 15%, assuming the expected decline in GDP this year in year 2012. The Greece crisis is not the only crisis in Europe that we're discussing right now. Very serious crisis is the euro crisis. It has also many dimensions. I would just attract your attention to the fact of the very low growth rates, actually negative growth rates over the last 4 years in euro area. And you can see today in year 2011, euro area on average has GDP per capita lower than it has in year 2007. While in the United States is mega growth, and in, for example, BRIC countries, it's a very substantial growth, about 8% per year in GDP per capita. What is important that these low growth rates for euro area is continued not only in the last year or in the last 4 years. It's continued for the whole period of existence of euro since introduction of the currency on January 1st, 1999. So as you can see, even in the last 13 years, euro area is lagging behind compared to United States or BRIC countries or many other regions of the world. So it's clearly euro area or European region is having low growth rates. It is true, for example, for EU 15, the countries that consist, that create some kind of the EU 15 before the last substantial enlargement of the Union. As you can see, once again, even for more than 3 decades, European Union is growing slower than some other regions of the world. What is even more important, if we look for really long trends, we are using here the data from Angus Medicine database. It's one of the best economic statistical database. We can see that Europe for 500 years, from 1500 until year 2000, was actually increasing the distance between itself and the world average in terms of GDP per capita. That created, this is the engine of economic growth, created modern Europe. Modern, sophisticated, advanced, showing the rest of the world the way of development in many areas in economics, politics, culture, science, and so on and so on. What happened in the last period? Over the last 11 years, as you can see, happened something that never happened in Europe with the exception of 2 world wars. GDP per capita in the EU 15 fell from 334% as a share of the world average, as a ratio to the world average, to 264%. This level, 264%, is exactly same as EU 15 had in 1961, exactly 50 years ago. So that is why, in terms of economic growth, in relative sense, Europe has lost almost half a century. What is the reason? What is the important element of this dimension? Is not only has a very serious repercussions for a number of areas, including security, but also for such an important area as political democracy and political freedom. Here you can see the world average index of political rights and civil liberties provided by data from Freedom House, weighted by nations' GDP by purchasing power parities in the last 40 years. As you can see, this index fell, and especially sharply over the last 7 years. It is not only due to the fact that some countries moved from free status, politically free status, to partially free status or non-free status, but also due to the fact that politically free countries, democratic countries, did grow over this period of time much slower than the countries that are not politically free. And that creates absolutely new political situation in the world. Look at this graph. It shows the shares of all GDP produced in politically free, in politically partly free, and politically non-free countries over the last 40 years. As you can see, the share of the world GDP produced in politically free countries over this period of time fell from 58% to 39% in year 2011. And the share of the world GDP produced in politically non-free countries grew from 14% in 1972 to 30% in year 2011. So just 4 decades ago, we had a different world in which almost 2/3 of world GDP was produced in politically free countries. And this political freedom created model aspirations for the rest of the world, where to go and how to go. And certainly Europe occupied a very important place as a model for development. Now, in year 2011, we have a very different situation. And in just 5 to 6 years, if all these trends continue, we would have absolutely new, qualitatively new situation when most part of world GDP will be produced in politically non-free countries. It would change framework, rules, models for development in the very substantial portion of the world, and would have a very serious repercussions for Europe as well. We have great variety in GDP growth in OECD region. And that is why there is no one rule and there is no one explanation for each country. But we have the most important factor that did influence substantial decline in growth rates in Europe, in OECD region, in Euro area, Euro crisis, Greece crisis, and some other countries. This is a rise of government expenditures, or size of the government as a share of GDP over the last more than 6 decades. We started after the Second World War with a government expenditure at level about 25% of GDP. Now, for our last 3 decades, size of government is having it around 50%. And this is a main reason for slowing down of economic growth in Europe and OECD region. As you can see from this graph, this is some kind of classical regression analysis that is used. On a horizontal axis, you can have government expenditures as a percentage of GDP, and on a vertical axis, average annual GDP growth rates. And this is dots, it's 144 observations for 24 countries of OECD for 6 decades. You can see this negative slope of the trend line from the upper left corner to the lower right corner. The glorious times, glorious days of economic miracles in OECD countries, with Spain in the 60s, Japan 60s, Japan in the 50s, and it's on the left and upper corner, when the government expenditures of share of GDP was relatively limited and the growth rate was about 10 or 12% per year within a decade. Now we move to the right low corner, with a very slow economic growth, about 2% per year and even lower. As you can see that every 1 percentage point increase in the share of government spending in GDP is accompanied mostly with about 0.1% decline in average annual GDP growth rate. Each time when you will discuss and vote your budget, think about this graph. If you look in the just last decade, just take 5 countries with the highest government expenditures versus 5 countries with low government expenditures in Europe. 5 countries with the high government expenditures in these 11 years are Denmark, France, Sweden, Austria, and Finland. And 5 countries with the lowest government expenditures are Luxembourg, Ireland, Estonia, Turkey, and Switzerland. This is just average numbers for each of these groups for 5 countries. Just now look what was the GDP growth rate for these 2 groups of countries. Countries that have high government expenditures had 1.8% GDP growth rates on average. Countries with low government expenditures had almost twice as high growth rates during the same period of time. The same true not only for longer period of time, but even for short period of time. During the global financial crisis of year 2008, year 2009, number of countries implemented so-called fiscal and monetary stimulus. As you can see from this graph, the larger was fiscal and monetary stimulus as percentage of GDP, the deeper was economic crisis. The champion in destruction of economic growth among those countries that put here, it's 42 countries of OECD plus Russia and Ukraine, was Russia, with the largest fiscal and monetary stimulus as a percentage of GDP and with the largest contraction in GDP. Those countries that were able to constrain themselves in using fiscal and monetary stimulus did have much smaller contraction of GDP, and some countries did not have contraction of GDP at all. One of the greatest example how these changes in economic policy can influence economic growth is comparison between 2 countries, Sweden and Greece. In 1980, Sweden has 60% of GDP spent in government. Greece has half of that. During this period of time, Sweden, especially since 1990s, was able to reduce substantially government size, government expenditures, while Greece increased it. During the same time, budget deficit as a share of GDP, as you can see here, was also very large in Sweden in the early 90s, but after that Sweden was able to balance budget, and especially during the last several years. Unfortunately, Greece was not able to do it, and budget deficit for a number of years had such level as 10 or even 15% of GDP. As a result of that, government debt as a share of GDP in Greece skyrocketed, while in Sweden it was even went down a little bit. As a result, Greece GDP per capita as percentage of GDP has changed dramatically. Over the first 20 years, 30 years after the Second World War, Greece was very fast cutting distance between itself in terms of GDP per capita and Sweden. After that, for next 25 years, the relative level of economic development in Greece was approximately the same, and in the last several years it fell substantially. What is important, just when we hear all this discussion that probably this crisis is due to some kind of Mediterranean culture that people have in Greece or Italy, Spain, Portugal, and so on. It is not true. We have an example just in front of us, countries that can be also called belonging to some extent to Mediterranean culture, Georgia. But by implementing the reforms that have been discussed by the President of Republics early this morning and the Chairman of the National Bank, Georgian authorities were able to implement policies that is conducive for economic growth. And as you can see, over the last 8 to 9 years, the GDP per capita in Georgia as percentage of the average EU 15 grew from roughly 12% to almost 20%. So the secret of sustainable economic growth now is not secret anymore. It is not geography. It is not climate. It is not culture. This is economic policy. Economic policy that is being decided by the authorities and by the respected and elected representative of society, including you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for these extremely interesting remarks. I must say, I very much liked your link between good prospects for the economy and the level of democracy. That is something that sounds so easy and occasionally is very hard to achieve. And I must say thank you very, very much for mentioning it and explaining it to us in such simple terms that even I, who am not an economist, could understand it. Thank you very, very much. Before we go into the debate, I would only like to make one quick administrative remark. In your program, it says that the family picture is going to be made at 2:30, but we have been asked to advance it, to do it directly after this panel session. So after, when the session concludes, I ask all participants to come up forward so that we can have a common picture of all of us being glad to be here in Batumi and participate at this fantastic conference. But now I open the floor for the debate, and the first one to take the floor is Mrs. Kauma from Finland. Mrs. Kauma, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I'm deeply honored to represent Finland as a part of OSCE delegation here in Georgia, and I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this event and for the splendid hospitality they have shown to us. Today we are going to tackling the issue of the meaning of good governance in terms of transparency and corruption. I would like to offer you some reflections on this subject from Finland's perspective. Statistically, Finland is a country of very low corruption. Our position on Transparency International's ranking has always been excellent, and Finland was the least corrupted country for several years. Currently, we are the second in the ranking, just after New Zealand. So maybe it is relevant to ask, what has Finland done right? As you might presume, there is no magic involved. Studies show that in Finland, government officials do not have high incentives to take bribes. This is obvious, but still one of the key factors. I find it most important that we ask ourselves what creates incentives for government officials to use their position for their own benefit. Studies usually conclude that some of the most important reasons for high corruption rate are prevailing attitudes towards corruption, low wages and unfair taxation, and that less developed countries can find themselves in so-called vicious circle, where low economic growth and high corruption feed each other for the mentioned reasons. There might be some truth to that, but I find that the number one reason for Finland's low level of corruption is our society and our social order. All Finns do have the same rights and possibilities in our society. Gender equality is not good enough, but still the best in the world, right after Norway. And all citizens have equal rights and access to education. Also, a relatively large proportion of labor force, 27%, work in the public sector, where the level of wages is almost 90% of private sector's corresponding level. These arguments may sound obvious or even flat, but the truth is that these established institutions explain the low corruption rate in Finland. Now, I do not want to give the impression that Finland doesn't have any problems with corruption. We definitely do have. I'm sad to say, but politicians and political parties have been under the loop, and for a very good reason. Political finance scandals some years ago made us realize that the lack of scrutiny of election funding is a real problem in Finland. Persons elected were already then required to report the source of the funding for their campaigns, but many of them did not do this, and this created an environment for scandal. The election scandal taught us a great deal about corruption and transparency, but I think that the most important lesson is that we Finns shall not keep on dreaming that our society is free of corruption. I personally believe that in order to build a corruption-free society, the key element must always be a real separation of powers into the branches of legislation, executive and judiciary. It is essential that the judicial system can function in an independent and transparent way, which will make the citizens trust in its capacity to guarantee equal rights and justice for all citizens. This conference is an excellent opportunity to discuss the elements of good governance and to remind us all that corruption is one of the world's greatest challenges and a major hindrance to economic development. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kauma, for your contribution. I forgot to say that I would like to limit the contributions from the audience to 3 minutes so that we are not running all that late. And the next one to take the floor is Senator Consiglio Di Nino.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the speakers and thanks to the organizers of this wonderful event. I'm going to restrict my comments on the dishonest, corrupt practices, which are a cancer as old as humanity. And I suspect, ladies and gentlemen, that this cancer will never be totally eliminated. But let us remind ourselves that these practices happen everywhere. East, west, north, and south, no country, no society has an exclusivity on corrupt practices. We have too often associated corruption with third world or emerging economies, but history loudly tells us that is not the case. As an example, the world's most recent economic crisis we're still suffering from took root in the USA and other Western developed nations. The carnage it created severely damaged the lives of countless men, women, and children. Ladies and gentlemen, humans create so-called vehicles or methods to steal from other humans, and only humans can prevent these practices by creating laws and governance systems that balance the need to A, encourage creativity, and B, combating corruption. And of course, those who commit these crimes must be severely punished. This needs determined, courageous, and strong commitment. Let me once again use an example. The world, and in particular the US, are trying to implement changes to rules governing banking institutions referred to as the Volcker Rule. Many banking institutions are strongly resisting, including JP Morgan Chase & Company. Its CEO, Jamie Dimon, is a strong, outspoken opponent of the Volcker Rule, which he called anti-American and cockamamie nonsense. I'm sure you heard that in the last few days, JP Morgan just lost $2 billion on a questionable trading practice, and that number is expected to increase by at least another billion. Let's remind ourselves that those $3 billion belong to people, workers, pensioners, widowers, and students. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, let me talk about the role we as parliamentarians play in this. Laws, regulations, and rules are made by parliamentarians. President Saakashvili reminded us of this morning, and good on him. If we are serious about at least reducing the incidence of corrupt practices, we must resist the pressures from the Jamie Dimons of this world. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we are the solution. It's really up to us. It's our responsibility. If we're not courageous and strong enough to implement solutions, then we are the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Consilio. And now the floor goes to Mrs. Morova from Belarus.
Уважаемый вице-президент Дуглас, уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа. Я также хочу поблагодарить гостеприимный парламент Грузии и ОБСЕ за хорошую организацию конференции. Проведение данной конференции – знаковое событие. И как уже сегодня многие говорили выступающие, значение так называемой второй корзины ОБСЕ или экономического и экологического измерения сегодня значительно выросло. Европейский регион в настоящее время сталкивается с нарастающими экономическими вызовами и угрозами. Он, по сути, охвачен многоуровневыми кризисами различной природы. Среди них кризис долгов и кризис финансовой системы, которые уже серьезно затронули устои европейской стабильности и грозят дальнейшими опасными тектоническими сдвигами в экономике и финансах. Кризис социально-экономического положения населения, который спровоцировал массовые протесты против систематического и грубого нарушения экономических и социальных прав людей. Волнения регулярно прокатываются по США, Великобритании, целому ряду других стран. Сегодня, как никогда, актуальны постулаты, изложенные в Хельсинском заключительном акте 1975 года, когда государства-участники выразили убеждение в том, что усилия с целью развития сотрудничества в сферах торговли, промышленности, науки и технологий, охраны окружающей среды и иных областях экономической деятельности способствуют усилению мира и безопасности в Европе и во всем мире в целом. Правительственные организации всего мира разрабатывают возможные варианты выхода из создавшейся ситуации. Парламентам нельзя оставаться в стороне от этого процесса. Совершенно очевидно, что справиться с кризисами мы можем только совместными согласованными усилиями. Сегодня важно понимание того, какие меры в сложившейся ситуации могли бы привести к реальным практическим результатам. По нашему убеждению, парламентариям необходимо сосредоточить свое внимание на создании и укреплении в регионе ОБСЕ прозрачной, дружественной атмосферы. Это, в свою очередь, будет значительно содействовать активизации многостороннего экономического взаимодействия и поможет определить пути выхода из создавшихся кризисных ситуаций. К нашему большому сожалению, даже в таких непростых условиях экономические аспекты зачастую используются в качестве рычагов давления и попыток решения политических вопросов. Я имею в виду применяемые в отношении нашей страны ограничительные меры и так называемые точные санкции. Их использование не только является контрпродуктивным, но и ведет к утрате доверия между партнерами и в конечном итоге к разбалансировке работы всей системы. Введенные санкции препятствуют развитию взаимовыгодного сотрудничества, имеют негативные последствия прежде всего для субъектов хозяйства непростых граждан, создавая искусственные барьеры в торговле и ведении бизнеса. Они отнюдь не способствуют укреплению атмосферы доверия и сотрудничества в регионе. Национальное собрание Республики Беларусь неоднократно заявляло о готовности к конструктивному диалогу с межпарламентскими организациями и парламентами иностранных государств на основе обоюдного уважения, без всяких предварительных условий и шантажа. Мы вновь это подтверждаем. Более того, мы убеждены в том, что только запуск полноценного, равноправного политического диалога открывает перспективу нормализации отношений. Неправомочное применение экономических санкций и ограничительных мер по политическим мотивам возвращает нас к практике пренебрежения закрепленными в устами ООН принципами невмешательства во внутренние дела суверенных государств. Мы выступаем за устранение искусственно создаваемых разделительных линий, необоснованных и противоречащих международному праву барьеров в торговле и настаиваем на полной отмене принятых санкционных мер. Мы убедительно призываем
Sorry, I think you have to come to an end.
строить многостороннее двухстороннее взаимодействие исключительно на равноправной основе в духе диалога и миролюбия, создавая благоприятную атмосферу для развития продуктивного сотрудничества на благо наших народов. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Morova. And now I give the floor to Mr. Johannes Koskinen from Finland.
Thank you, Madam President. We all agree with the fact that good governance, anti-corruption measures are important in fostering growth and sustainable growth in our democracies. We have adopted during last 10-15 years many international documents and conventions which try to avoid corruption in many ways. We have conventions against corruption and bribery, such as the OECD, EU and Council of Europe conventions on bribery, the UN Convention Against Corruption, and the Cotonou Agreement on Development Aid. And we have also international agencies. I guess the OSCE should be more of that kind of international cooperation mechanism which very heavily supports anti-corruption policies. If we look at the individual nations, what the parliaments and the governments could do, we have heard good examples of Georgia from the President and President Saakashvili and the Director of the Central Bank. But as a whole, a good national anti-corruption program approaches the problems from all angles. The approach must also be that of preventing possible cases of corruption in the future and developing and changing systems rather than conducting various kinds of witch hunts. A national anti-corruption campaign will typically contain the following elements: comprehensive anti-corruption legislation, and there these international conventions are of great help. The openness of documents, transparency in public government, both at local and national level, is very important. Identification of those parts of the public sector in which corruption is most evident, and action plans to correct the situation. We have to have independent investigation agencies. The development of legislative and administrative processes through which corruption can be prevented is important, and the education of civil servants especially. Development of creative partnerships between the public sector and civil society, including the private sector and religious organizations that can be involved in anti-corruption work. When we build up democracies, civil societies, we have to keep in mind also this important goal of good governance, and there we must have connections between the private companies, the civil society, the administration as a whole. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koskinen. And now I give the floor to Mr. Barbieri from Italy.
Grazie Presidente. Io vorrei fare due domande. La prima a Mr. Illiranov. Lei ci ha dato dei dati, devo dire, importantissimi e credo nuovi per tanti di noi. Uno in particolare mi ha colpito: la discesa del tasso di crescita nei paesi democratici, che lei ha definito liberi, rispetto a quello che accade nei paesi in cui non c'è la libertà politica. La mia domanda è: non crede che questo finisca per essere un problema assolutamente irrisolubile nella misura in cui le condizioni del mercato del lavoro nel suo complesso, quindi l'accesso al lavoro, le condizioni della sicurezza sul lavoro, sono distanti anni luce tra quello che accade nei paesi dell'area euro e quello che accade nei paesi del BRIC. Abbiamo visto tutti in Cina delle situazioni di lavoro che esistevano nel mio paese, cioè in Italia, agli inizi del secolo scorso, sia nell'industria che nelle campagne. Quindi volevo chiederle se lei ritiene che a questo si possa in qualche modo porre rimedio. La mia opinione è che ben difficilmente si potrà porre rimedio. La seconda domanda la voglio rivolgere all'ambasciatore Lozos. Anche lei ha fatto una relazione molto interessante, però c'è un nodo che la sua relazione non ha affrontato. Lei ha parlato di necessità di continuare nelle politiche di rigore e di crescita. Ma come ritiene che sia possibile conciliare le politiche di rigore economico e finanziario con la crescita dei paesi? Grazie Presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barbieri, for your interesting questions. And I would like to ask my colleagues here on the podium to note down if they have had questions, so because at the end they get the floor once again and then they can intervene and answer. Now I would like to give the floor to Senator Down from Canada.
Colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this exchange of views on this very timely topic. I want to focus on one of the many results that can occur when good governance and the creation of a positive business and investment environment in the OSCE region are not in place or respected, specifically tax evasion. While the topic of taxes always generates interesting debate, at the end of the day, individuals and corporations are legally bound to pay them. And yet, in the OSCE region, cases of tax evasions abound. Moreover, some states in the regions facilitate these cases with national regulations about financial secrecy that tax evaders find appealing for hiding their money in these countries. The result of these activities has been, according to estimates by the World Bank, the loss of billions of euros in our collective economies. In a time when government and citizens are facing cutbacks, growing unemployment, particularly among the young, and reduced pension benefits for the elderly, in order to balance budgets and manage debt, tax evasions and lost revenues to the state are unacceptable. It is difficult, it is wrong to ask citizens to sacrifice while permitting a wealthy few to avoid paying taxes and their fair share to the state. Solutions do exist. These include setting taxes at reasonable levels so as not to encourage tax avoidance, cultivating a culture of tax payment, engaging financial institutions, improving transparency, and enforcing compliance both within countries and between countries. The failure of individuals and corporations to pay their fair share of taxes requires other citizens to make up the shortfall in state revenue. I want to congratulate those countries that have already begun to take steps in the right direction, but much remains to be done. I also encourage all parliamentarians to enhance the political will in our countries to define these solutions and to hold our government to account for their enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I now give the floor to my Swedish colleague, Monica Green.
Thank you very much, and thank you for good presentations. I would like to ask you about gender equality. I didn't hear if someone of you mentioned that in your presentation about Georgia. We know that the economy grows when men and women have the opportunity to take place in the labor market. And in that case, we also need a welfare sector with high quality. Do you have any figures about unemployment, about men and women in Georgia?
Thank you very much, Monica, for this brief but very important question. And I now give the floor to Monsieur Jean-Paul Dupré from France.
Merci Madame la Présidente, mes chers collègues.
Lutter contre la crise économique est une volonté partagée ici par tous. Je suis convaincu que le développement du tourisme est l'un des volets qui peut y contribuer, alors que c'est un sujet qui, à première vue, pourrait sembler futile. Mais le tourisme constitue une composante majeure de l'économie mondiale. C'est même la première industrie mondiale en termes de croissance. Si la crise financière et économique a interrompu cette croissance, il ne faut pas oublier que ce secteur est l'un de ceux qui rebondissent le plus vite. Nous en débattons ici dans cette ville de Batumi, qui est un très bel exemple en matière de potentiel économique. Il génère à côté de la filière directe, transport, hébergement, restauration, un très grand nombre d'activités, accompagnement, animation, activités sportives, culturelles et commerciales. Il est consommateur de main-d'œuvre avec un large éventail d'emplois, y compris non qualifiés. Surtout, s'il est bien pensé, le tourisme permet également de valoriser, de protéger, de conserver les patrimoines culturels et naturels et enfin les atouts économiques. C'est par là même un vecteur essentiel du développement durable, car dans ces conditions, il prend en compte les paramètres sociaux et environnementaux des zones où il se développe. Pour la France, première destination touristique en nombre de visiteurs, le potentiel de croissance offert aujourd'hui par le tourisme justifie une politique ambitieuse et innovante. Fiscalisation différenciée pour ne pas créer les friches touristiques de demain, développement de projets par filière sur l'exemple des secteurs de l'agroalimentaire destinés à financer l'innovation touristique, notamment dans les PME et les TPE. Voici donc quelques exemples d'instruments pour accompagner nos entreprises et nos collectivités locales. La Géorgie possède de nombreuses potentialités, et en particulier dans l'écotourisme. Et je suis heureux de voir que la France a choisi d'accompagner notre pays hôte et de simplifier.
და საფრანგეთზე როცა ვლაპარაკობ პარტნიორ ქვეყნებზე ხელი უნდა შეუწყოთ ამგვარ ტურიზმს, მაგათად მესტიაში ვთქვათ პროექტი რომ მოხდეს რეაბილიტაცია, ეკოტურიზმი, ნამდვილად ტურიზმს აქვს ძალიან დიდი დამატებითი ღირებულება, რესურსები, ადგილობრივი მმართველობაც უნდა იყოს ჩართული და ხელისუფლება, მოსახლეობა. აი ამ სტრატეგიას ადგენენ, ეს არის ეკონომიკური ზრდის წინაპირობა ბევრ ქვეყანაში. დიდი მადლობა პატივცემულო კოლეგა და სანამ მივცემ საშუალებას შემდეგ გამოსვლას მე მსურს ვთქვა რომ 3 წუთში ჩვენ ვამთავრებთ სპიკერების გამოსვლელების შეკითხვებს და თუ გსურთ შეკითხვის დასმა ახლავე უნდა გვაცნობოთ 3 წუთი გვაქვს დარჩენილი შეკითხვებისთვის და ახლა ვაძლევ საშუალებას ჩემ კოლეგას სერგი შევჩუკს უკრაინიდან. დიდი მადლობა ბატონო ქალბატონო თავმჯდომარეო, მინდა მადლობა გადავუხადო ყველა სპიკერს ძალიან საინტერესო გამოსვლისათვის და კომენტარი გავაკეთო ელჩი ლოზოსის გამოსვლასთან დაკავშირებით, რომელიც ეკონომიკურ და ეკოლოგიურ საკითხებს კურირებს ეუთოში. პარლამენტარებს დღეს ჰქონდათ საშუალება კიდევ ერთხელ მოესმინათ იდეები ბატონი ელჩის. მსურს მოგახსენოთ, რომ დისკუსია ვენაში მეორე კომიტეტში იყო ძალიან საინტერესო დისკუსია და პარლამენტარები იწონებენ ბატონი ლოზოსის მოწოდებას, მზაობას, რომ იყოს მასტრიხტ პლუსის სტრატეგიის ცვლილებას იმ მიზნით, რომ უფრო ასე ვთქვათ რეალური გავხადოთ ეს მნიშვნელოვანი დოკუმენტი. ჩვენ გეთანხმებით სრულიად, რომ კრიზისული პერიოდის განმავლობაში, აგრეთვე მაშინ, როდესაც არის პოსტკრიზისული პერიოდი, მეორე განზომილება
This period too, the second dimension of the OSCE's work is going to come to the fore. And here the work of the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council of Ministers is particularly relevant. Today, the chairman of the Parliament of Georgia said that when he worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he saw parliamentary diplomacy as something that was usually in the way of the work of the real diplomats. But when he became a parliamentarian himself, he understood how much the parliamentarians broaden opportunities for diplomacy because they can say so much more. And they work in a much less artificial atmosphere, and they can unite behind a real idea of force. So when we talk about developing, for instance, new energy-saving technologies, when we talk about developing the economy of the OSCE region, we agree, all of us, how important stable development is, how important it is to work together rather than in confrontation, and how important it is for us to be able to affect the thinking of our decision makers. So what you said, Ambassador Lozosif, was particular importance in this context. And as chair of one of the committees, I would like to say that in support of your bold ideas and in order to and in your attempts to deal with the bureaucracy and get beyond it, you can count on the support of the Parliamentary Assembly to 100%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, for this constructive approach of a cooperation between the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and the OSCE, which is really great. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to my Dutch colleague, Kathleen Ferrier.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thanks for all the speeches this morning that held such interesting contributions to the important and timely debate that we have here this morning. I'm impressed by what Georgia has achieved both economically and politically, and it has been pointed out clearly that Georgia has a great potential politically and through its human resources, and can play a crucial role for that reason, because also of its position between the European Union and Asia in the midst of the Central Asian republics. We have seen this morning Europe today as a victim of a crisis, both economically and politically. We have seen the growing of the BRIC countries, booming economically, at least in the near future. And that brings to me the question how Georgia sees its own role and what partnerships for cooperation Georgia is seeking today and in the near future, and what role we as parliamentarians could play for effective cooperation, as it is also seen by Georgia itself for the future. And I would be grateful if Mr. Kadagice, the President of the National Bank, and Mr. Dimitrov, as head of the EU delegation to Georgia, could comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Kathleen. I like it very much when you put specific questions to specific speakers, because that makes the debate in a way very lively. And as the last participant in the debate, before I take back the word and distribute it here on the panel, I would like to give the floor to Mr. D'Amico from Italy.
Grazie, Presidente.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I'd like to put a question in particular to Mr. Ilyanov, because at the end of his statement, he said word for word that economic policy amounts to secrets. Well, taking economic policy being applied at the moment by the Italian government, I'd like to know his opinion, that maybe of other speakers, because Italy, as you know, has major problems in terms of its debt, 123% of its GDP. And Europe has insisted that this be lowered, ensuring that the books must be balanced, and this must be included in the Constitution. So we've now included in our Constitution that we must always balance the books. We can no longer run up such a debt. We must reduce it. And to do so, the government has chosen measures which are linked to taxation. I don't think that anything has been done so far to reduce state spending. That is the major burden in the public sector, but direct and indirect taxes have been increased, so it seems to be leading to zero growth, if not negative. So, given this example of austerity in Italy, which appears not to be producing the desired growth. I'd like to know what our distinguished speakers think of this situation.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, for this interesting question. And now I would like to give the floor for a final roundup to our participants here on the panel. And I start precisely the other way around as we had as an introduction. So the first one to get the floor is Mr. Ilayonov.
Unfortunately, I have not heard the first question since the system has not been adjusted properly. But I've heard another question from the representative of Italy concerning the very serious fiscal situation and the very high level of the government debt to GDP. Certainly, the problem cannot be solved overnight. It cannot be solved over 1 year. It's a long-term project. It's a long-term strategy to reduce, first of all, the debt to GDP ratio. This policy can be achieved only if, in a long-term process, the government would have budget surplus. So that is why the level of revenues would exceed the level of government expenditures for a number of years. So that is why you would be able to reduce this debt to GDP ratio. So that is why the recommendations that can be given to Italian authorities and Italian society by any economist is just to adjust government expenditures. It is up to the representative of Italian society to decide what exactly should be done in this regard. But there is only one way to that, is just to reduce government expenditures, and in the long run, maybe to reduce government taxation as well, just to leave an opportunity for economic growth of Italy, to at least to repeat that economic miracle that Italy had in the 50s, 60s, and the early 70s.
Thank you very much, sir, for your answer. And I now give the floor to Mr. Karagice.
Thank you for your questions. I'll just give very brief comments regarding the tourism potential and ecotourism that was mentioned. I think it's definitely one of the most important sectors of economy which will be driving growth. Here, what is very important, and I should mention this, is that every visitor, every foreigner that comes to this country, usually for the first time, the first remark is, oh, Georgia is very different inside than Georgia from outside. And this is a big outreach strategy that needs to be developed. I don't want to go in political aspects of the propaganda that's going on, but that's certainly the case. We see Georgia as a part of the big European family, by all means. Today, our biggest challenge is in terms of the trade, because we have zero trade with 2 out of 3 large markets neighboring Georgia. I'm meaning Russia and Iran. So basically we are operating in the environment where the trade with the neighbors, the large markets, is very limited. So in this sense, the free trade agreement with the EU, of course, is one of the biggest priority in terms of the economic perspectives, because all the countries that we are comparing and competing, they have undergone through the process of economic boom, and of course it's a big stage when countries have a free access to the big market. Lastly, in terms of the gender part, of course I'm not an expert in this field. The only thing that I can say is that in terms of the unemployment among men are bigger than among women. The general figure is close to 16%. So among men, unemployment is close to 18%. Among women, close to 15%. That's pretty much worse. And what I can tell you in terms of the employment, I can give you the precise fact. In the Central Bank of Georgia, 55% are male and 45% are female. So that's exactly the answer in how it's in my institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And now I give the floor to Ambassador Dimitrov.
Well, I will probably pick up from something that President Saakashvili said early in the morning, and it was that reforms should be done entirely, not in half. It reminds me of something which late President Havel used to say: I would rather have temporary incompetence than permanent sabotage. And President Havel proved right. Seems to me that President Saakashvili is proving right too. It is very immodest to try to tell you what will the Georgians think of their future role. I mean, I can only guess. But my guess is that they are dreaming to see themselves as a model country of small government, good governance, and economic growth in the region. And I guess that they wish to see themselves as a hub for tourism, exchange in all spheres, including cultural, and a place through which a most important connection between Europe and Central Asia, etc., transport-wise, and Europe and Azerbaijan and the Caspian Sea, energy-wise, is being affected. This is my guess.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And now, as last speaker from the panel here, I give the word to Ambassador Lozos.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My reaction to a few remarks that were put to me, I'm going to answer them in the order that they were addressed. Thank you very much, Mr. Koskinen. I really appreciated your statement. It was short and to the point and very practical. I can only promise to you that as we will be looking at the draft of decision on good governance that would start most probably at the end of the summer, beginning of fall, will take on board your remarks. They were very pertinent, and again, I'm very thankful to you. Mr. Barbieri, if I understood correctly, because there was a problem with my connection here, you asked me how one can reconcile austerity with growth. I can give you an answer, if you will, my personal answer, and an answer of a non-expert. But if you allow me, I will refrain from doing so because I want to articulate my thoughts from the point of view of the OSCE's Second Committee and what the OSCE is doing. We speak of the second dimension as an integral part of the other two, that they form the comprehensive security of the OSCE area, the comprehensive and indivisible security. And as I said in my intervention, for a long time, economic and environmental activities were completely outside of the radar screen of the OSCE's security dimension. More popular themes were human rights, rightly so, as well as the non-military aspects of security, again, rightly so. And economics and environmental issues were placed at a much lower level, and frankly speaking, we were paying a lip service. Indeed, I said that austerity measures are beginning to be the cure for all evils in our embattled societies. I said this because the effects on the social cohesion of societies is beginning to show its impact on security. And that was my focal point. And frankly speaking, to give you my personal view, the world crisis is not political, is not social, is not financial. I think these are merely symptoms. To my mind, and I'm talking to you as a private citizen, as a voter, the disease is the unprecedented erosion of popular confidence in the powers that be they political, financial, educational, spiritual, or whatever. So the loss of popular support in those powers that be are making citizens really very worried. And common sense simply make him not believe. And this is why he's tempted to take to the streets. I think, therefore, that the OSCE is not an institution that can provide solutions to economic problems. We saw a little earlier when Mr. Illarionov gave us some figures in his PowerPoint presentation, that the economic situation of the OSCE countries was given by statistical data through the IMF. What I believe and what I'm trying to do in this committee, and I said it also in public presentations and in memos, is to make the OSCE empowered not to compete with other institutions that are more specialized, but simply to get back the OSCE to the fore, to be connected with the average citizen, and to reconnect with you, and especially and more particularly through you, to making economic parameters a security guarantee for all of us. My last remark goes to Mr. Šefčuk. Thank you so much for your encouraging words, Mr. Šefčuk. You mentioned counter-bureaucracy. Well, we are fortunate at least that we are having a Secretary General now that is trying to make an internal debate, an internal reform in the OSCE. And also the Irish chairmanship very recently kicked off a debate on reforming the OSCE as a whole through the Helsinki Plus 40 concept. But there is one thing that I need to repeat, and perhaps this is what makes a point in difference. Do not forget that the two fundamental principles of the OSCE are inclusiveness and consensus. And when it comes to the idea of reforming structures and moving ahead, these have to be taken into consideration. However, and having said that, I think member states have realized that it is time to reassess again the OSCE achievement, and it is time to move ahead, taking risks. Only very recently, a week ago, the 56 ambassadors had a meeting and they discussed this reform process and the way ahead. You asked me about also the changes to the Maastricht Treaty. The mandate that I received as chairman of the Economic Committee was not to review the Maastricht Treaty, but to initiate procedures with a view to reviewing it. So what I am doing now, and I'm doing very carefully and very cautiously, is to collect the reactions of the member states to this document that has served us and has served us well since 2003. And in Dublin, we will present our findings One of the reasons why we are cautious is that we do not want to finish on a one-off this project. As you understand, it's a long-term project, and hopefully our findings will be taken over by the Ukrainian chairmanship of the OSCE that comes in the year 2013, and for which I wish you all the best and all the support. Thank you, sir.
Well, let me thank you, our speakers, most warmly for their very interesting presentations, which really, I think, were a very good start for our economic conference because they set the tone. There were many new ideas, many a little bit unexpected ideas, and I must say I like that very much. And we also got a really good picture of the fantastic economic development that this country is going through, which is really something which encourages us enormously. But I would also like to thank you who took part in the debate, to be precise, to be to the point, and to ask questions. It's obviously important that you share your views with us, but it's also good that you have precise questions, because that makes a debate much more lively. Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank our Assistant Secretary General for keeping this panel going, which in the beginning was a bit complicated with microphones not working and other things. I must say, thanks to Tina, everything worked out beautifully well administratively. And now, before we go to lunch, we are going to have the family picture right here, and I would like to ask all members of parliament to come up here to get a picture, a group photo of all of us together. Thank you so much.